Hi, and welcome back to the History Hut as we continue our discussion on the Mongols. And we discussed the successor to Genghis Khan. And how does Ogedei manage to rule such a large empire?
Well, that's a good question, and the short answer is that he's not very good at it at all, but it doesn't matter because his brothers are good rulers. So Ogedei just kind of goes to Karakorum and gets down to some serious drinking, and his brothers take over the empire. So this period from his succession until his death is actually seen as a really dynamic period, but probably for all the wrong reasons. So it's the brothers that do so well, and then the brothers. The sons of the brothers, of course, the kind of next generation that will be really, really successful. As I said, Ogedei isn't up to much, but his brothers are. And so you have a division. I say division of territory because we talk about the four khanates, but in fact, I mean, they're all still ruled and controlled by whoever is the great Khan. So Jochi's sons, Batu and Orda, they can remember Jochi died just before his father. So Jochi's sons, they're given the Golden Horde, which is also called the Kipchak Khanate, and that's the territories of Rus. So kind of modern day Russia. Golden Horde because the tents are so fabulous because there's so much wealth in the area. Chagadai, one of the other sons, Chagadai, pardon me, is given the area just to the west of Karakorum or Mongolia, and it's called the Chagadai Khanate, and it would be the area that would be most like the old school Mongols before they became world conquerors, just kind of hang out, hunt, and do all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of the backwater of empire. Doesn't really see anything in the way of settlement. You see maybe military groups coming through or caravans coming through, but for by that, not much action. Ogedei, of course, gets the Great Khanate, which is Mongolia and what they've taken of China. So he gets that. And there's another Khanate called the Il Khanate, and that's the areas around Persia, and they're ruled just by an envoy of the Khan, so not necessarily a ruling member of the kind of royal family. So it is kind of a division, but whoever is the Khan of the Great Khanate is considered to be the ruler of the four parts of the empire.
And who would be the most influential of those rulers?
Oh, well...
Doctor.
I know, yeah. Who's my hit pick? My hit pick would probably be Kublai Khan, and he's grandson of Genghis Khan. Kublai Khan becomes... it's his brother Monkey, so it's Ogedei, then Guyag, Ogedei, Guyag is the son of Ogedei, and then it goes to Monkey, who's the next kind of line. It's the next brother, Tulai, who's over here, and it's Monkey and Kublai and Arak are in that line of the three brothers, and so two of them, Monkey does extremely well, and there's lots of stuff that you can read about Monkey's campaigns. But after his death, it comes down to really Arak and Kublai, and Arak is declared the great Khan, but Kublai takes him on, and there's all sorts of infighting and people, siding with one and siding with the other. But Kublai comes out as dominant in 1260, and he's very focused on China. There's everything China. He loves the Chinese way of life. He likes the way the Chinese emperors dress. So he becomes less like a Mongolian ruler and more like a Chinese emperor. And it's under Kublai Khan that the Sung Empire finally collapses in 1279. So remember, you had the Jin pushing the Sung south and their headquarters at Hangzhou, and now of course, Genghis has taken on the Jin and most of northern China, and now it's going to be left up to Kublai to do the rest of the bizzo. And so he moves his capital from Karakorum to Peking in about 1264, and he calls his dynasty the Yuan Dynasty, Y-U-A-N. So he just kind of takes on, remember we were talking about how China just kind of sucks everybody in, nothing changes. So he says, I'll have my own dynasty. It's a very short-lived dynasty. But he goes on, while he's in China, he also pacifies Korea in the 1270s, and he launches two really famous, but both of them failed attacks on Japan in 1274 and 1281. 1281, the Japanese are saved by the divine winds, the kamikaze winds. So two failed attacks there, and he dies in his capital in about 1294 at the age of about 79, and his dynasty only lasts until 1368, and then it's taken down by a new group coming in from the north, and
surprise,
they become the Ming dynasty, and of course they'll last until about 1644 when the same thing happens to them. So Kublai, very interesting character.
And wasn't it Marco Polo who first told us about him?
Well, yeah, I think in the West that's really how we know him, so I'm glad you asked that. Marco Polo, of course, more famous in Canada is that game that you play in the cheap motel swimming pool. Marco Polo. Yeah, but,
he also did some other stuff.
Yeah, he did some other stuff.
Not all fun and games with old...
water, though, he's certainly involved in water. So Polo, of course, a merchant who claims to have been in the East with his father and his uncle's business. He claims to have worked at Kublai's court from 1275 to 1292. His family certainly were merchants. They had what we'd call merchant factories in Constantinople and at Kabul. And he left accounts, really quite clear accounts of places like Hangzhou, and also of Kublai Khan's Japanese campaigns, which he more than likely was not on. So his nickname is Il Milione. He doesn't write down his own accounts. He's actually in prison, and the guy in the cell with him writes the account for him. So it's actually been a matter of some debate. Frances Woods, who works in the British Museum, heads the Chinese section. She has a book called Did Marco Polo Go to China? And I think it's 1996 maybe it came out. And there's a great review of her book in the Journal of World History. You can look at it's about a 4-page thing. It's volume 10 from the spring of 1999.
Oh yeah,
it's by
I remember
Carl
that
Schmidt.
one.
You probably read that one, and she points to lots of things like there are language issues in the text. There's no, of course, original manuscript. There's no or very few first-person accounts, and on a practical level, he doesn't mention the thing that fascinated everybody: Chinese writing. He doesn't mention chopsticks. He doesn't mention foot binding. He doesn't mention the Great Wall. So she really doesn't think. What she thinks is that he probably was at Kabul, great crossroads of trade. And that he probably listened to all sorts of stories coming in from the East, and then just kind of incorporated them and used them as his own. But there are just as many scholars that support her as are opposed to this and think that Marco Polo did in fact go there, and and he leaves us an account of what life was like at the court of Kublai Khan. And he gives an incredibly detailed description of Hangzhou. As I said, he talks about how many sections there were in the streets, and he talks about the courtesans, and he talks about, the way people were in the city and what kind of things were traded. So not really sure, which to go for, but interesting nonetheless, because that's how we know him. The travels of, here's in fact a version. Marco Polo, the travels of Marco Polo, and you can get that usually at chapters, and it doesn't cost all that much because it's a classic, so they're usually cheaper than the regular books. You
can probably rent it from the library too, if you're a starving student.
That's right. Yeah, it's probably in the library.
Apparently they have those on campus.
Yeah, things called books in big buildings. Big buildings, yeah. So, we do know a bit, mostly from Marco Polo.
Now, besides the massive effort put into the China campaign, do the Mongols come west again?
Oh, indeed they do, and it's much to the horror of people in the West. By the time the Mongols arrive, initially with Subadai, the age of the great Kievan princes has already come and gone. This area had been very, very sophisticated. Kiev, an incredibly sophisticated place by the 11th century. They had a rota system of succession. They had codified Slavic law. They had, of course, lots of churches and religious literature. They had the Cyrillic alphabet. They were translating things from Greek to Slavic. nomadic, and they had had trouble with nomadic steppe people called the Cumans in the late 11th century, and by the early 13th century, this area is almost cut off from its kind of natural heartland, which would be Byzantium, the Byzantine Empire, and Constantinople. So they have their first run-in with the Mongols, of course, in 1223, and lose to them. And again, there are lots of really good accounts of these early campaigns. But remember, Subadai's just doing his reconnaissance, and then he goes back out again. And in 1237, Batu, one of Jochi's sons, uses Subadai, and they come back and they overrun the lands of Rus by about 1240, and they invade modern-day Poland, Moravia, and Hungary. But they leave again in 1241 with the death of Ogedei. So whenever the Khan died, everybody came back for the big election. So Europe kind of spared that time, and in fact, they, happy to be spared. They did keep a capital at Sarai on the river Volga, so Sarai on the Volga, and the princes who were there submitted to the Mongols, and they were given charters called yarliks. A yarlik, and these were to allow them to continue ruling, and all they had to do was bring annual tribute, and that would be, of course, decided upon by the Mongols, bring an annual tribute to Sarai, and this works really well at first, but a century and a half later, and the Mongols are fighting amongst themselves. One group won't help another group. They're becoming too greedy, and they're starting to fight with the local people too, and so the kind of short part of the story is that this seems to cause the rise of Muscovy. So rather than the Kievan princes having been the kind of central focus of that territory, you get the rise of the Muscovy princes under Dmitry Donskoy, and he routs the Mongols at a famous battle, the Battle of Kulikovo in 1380. This brings independence to the Muscovites, so Moscow area. And it's the rulers of Moscow then that lead the resistance to the Mongols over the next 8 decades or so. And it might be a name or two that you're familiar with, because it's Ivan III that spreads Muscovite power and uses his Cossacks to actually extend eastward into what we would consider to be Mongol territory. And then later on, it's Ivan the Terrible who defeats, you must know about him.
Heard of him?
It was his mum called him that. Ivan the Terrible defeated what was left of the Mongols in the Volga Valley, and that's about in the 1550s, and they all retreat back to Mongolia. Now, I mean, there's all sorts of other things that are happening in between. You get the rise of people like Tamerlane, who fights with other Mongol groups, considers himself to be Mongol and fights with everybody else as well, and uses some of the techniques of Genghis Khan. Very kind of interesting character, but in the end, it's the kind of center of Rus civilization was out of Kiev. Then you get the Mongols coming in, and really nasty times, and this leads to a kind of nationalist backlash from the Muscovite princes, so you get the rise of Muscovy and eventually the independence of those lands, and that's really a signal for the end of the Mongols. They just kind of all get pushed back, so they're coming back up from China in the 1360s in disgrace, because they haven't they haven't been playing nice with the Mongols at Karakorum, and then you have by the 1500s they're coming back from the west. So they're a spent force by then. They certainly are.
Well, speaking of the end of the Mongols, that's the end of our discussion of the Mongols. We'll be back on the next episode of The History.